Welcome, welcome. Feel free to turn on your cameras if you feel called to that. Um, yeah, thank you for joining us today. My name is Karen Brown. I am a co-director and a principal investigator of the Rocky Mountain Reach Award. And we're excited to host our third and final Reach Ready series webinar today with Teddy Johnson, who is the Director of Technology Development at the Institute of Translational Health Sciences. There are a couple things I'll go over before I hand it over to him. Always welcome questions about the REACH program throughout the process. If there's anything that comes up that you're thinking about your particular project on. Our next cohort is getting funded, or is the RFA is released. So the pre-applications for that are due on February 7th at 5 o'clock. And we're just excited to have Teddy with us here today to hopefully help position your projects a little bit better, or understand a little bit more about how to effectively use product claims and what the regulatory pathways are. So welcome, Teddy. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here and would love to, since we don't have too many people on the call, I'd love to hear just quickly where people are coming from and kind of what their area of research or practice or specialization is. That's okay with folks. That would help me kind of tailor the comments. Could we start with Kanika? Or maybe we could go to Juliet. How do you feel about that?
Sure. Hi, I'm Juliet Tinker from Boise State in the biology department. And I'm developing a vaccine for mastitis against Staphylococcus aureus in cows, in dairy cows.
Okay, thanks a lot. How about you, Emma? I don't know if you can talk or if you're in a place to.
Evan says she's in a public space and can't speak loud, but she's a first-year PhD student in neuroscience. Just curious about how this process works in general.
Wonderful, thanks for that. And coming back to you, Konika, were you able to speak?
Hi, this is Konika. I have joined Nicole's team very recently, and I'm here on behalf of her to get to know more about REACH and all.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. It helps me kind of focus what we're talking about. My name's Teddy Johnson, and I have a few things just on the screen to give you a perspective on the way I think and what perspective I have. I spent 25 years developing medical devices primarily, but also some digital health tools. Along the way, did a lot of first-in-human clinical studies all over Europe, parts of Latin America, and did a lot of stuff in the US. Then when I got onto the marketing side, did a lot of market entry work. That is my absolute favorite thing to do. And along with that, there is a whole world of discussion of regulatory pathway and what that means in terms of testing and product development to support the claims that you're going to be able to make from the marketing perspective. And so, as you can see, I spent a long time in Silicon Valley, so my thinking tends to be, if we're going to do it, let's do it now and let's do it fast. So you will see that reflected. Came up in a school of design thinking. And so for me, everything is, if you're going to make something, really have it be tied to a rationale. Like start with what you're trying to make first, for whom, rather than just making stuff. Trained capoeira, which is an Afro-Brazilian dance game, martial art, and it is incredibly fluid and unconventional. And you'll probably also see that. Trained to be an Ayurvedic wellness counselor and wanted to be an actor, but just wasn't in the cards yet. Maybe I'll kick it off when I'm in my 80s. Anyway, thanks for being here. And we're going to take you through one of my favorite parts, my job. I work at the Institute of Translational Health Sciences, and I run a technology development center, and this is it. Help people turn their research into products and products into companies. So I talk to people about all sorts of things. It's really fun because half the time I only know half the words they're using. And what I really work in is the patterns to help people get where they're going. And I've been told that you had a target product profile session. I've taught these, and this is kind of the way I think about target product profiles. It really gets to the place of, okay, who is this for and what are you trying to do, right? And with that, we really get into this intended use, what are the indications, where will this be used, how, and what sort of cases, scenarios, clinical situations. And then along with that, what are the things that you'll avoid? So as with any strategic exercise, it's not just what you're going to do, but it's really heavily focused on what you're not going to do. So that's always really important to keep in mind, especially as you're looking forward, with the regulatory path and the clinical studies to get you to where you need to be down that regulatory path. Okay. So just have this in the back of your mind. And of course, it's important to do it for, the market entry product and for what would be your optimal product. There's kind of that ideal product, which I'm not going to lie, we just never get to. And there is a natural challenge that people face with early stage innovators in that it can be really difficult to let something go, I'll say, to development or to production when you feel like the science isn't quite finished yet, or there's another feature that you could add. So it's really important to have this market entry mindset, this we're just getting started, and knowing that there's a commitment to doing what is going to be the optimal product. And that's part of the development timeline, but that needs to be able to be separated. You have to be able to let the market entry one out the door. Okay, and we're going to have completely different thinking for those two, but we just kind of have a continuity of planning with different thinking. Okay, so people talk about intended use and indications for use. I'll admit, like, I mix these up too, right? As a marketer, all I think about is like, what do I get to say, right? And you might think about that from the perspective of what do I get to say as a marketer in ads? But medical devices, I'm pretty much focusing on medical devices for this, but the thinking applies broadly. What do I get to say is actually not a marketing thing. It's very much of a clinical thing, because your labeling is a promise to the clinician, the user, that if they do what you say they can do with your product, the patient will be safe and the patient will be well taken care of, right? And so that's really the promise. That's why there's so much regulation around this, because what you're not saying they can do, you may have tested for safety or you may not have, but what you are saying they can do, you really need to be rigorous about making sure that you can back up whatever your claims are. Okay? And that's a really important and central piece of this. Are there any questions about that so far? And I'm happy to take questions if we don't have too many folks on. Okay, I'm going to move on, but you can always type in anytime. Okay, let's go. All right, so we are going to talk about the products of a company I worked at as kind of a backdrop for all of this. And in this case, it was a startup company called Acclarent, and we were making basically cardiology balloons, so little mini balloons, maybe 3 millimeter, 4 millimeter diameter, elongated balloons. And instead of opening up coronary arteries or maybe, peripheral vascular arteries, opening up sinuses in the head. So people who have chronic sinus infections, what's actually happening is that it's really just that the opening, the ostium, gets blocked and then they don't drain. And if there's no drainage, you get an infection. Okay, so it's kind of an anatomical thing that has historically been treated with surgery. But if you open up the hole with a balloon and you allow drainage, you have allowed drainage, and then the infection heals, which is kind of nice, right? This is a in and out in about an hour, and you go home same day and you feel great, as opposed to, a week-long recovery from a pretty extensive surgery. So I'm pointing out frontal sinus surgery because the frontal sinuses are kind of these like pads up here. They're right, you know, behind the skull, like right in that frontal space. And they're right in front of your brain. So of all the ear, nose, and throat doctors out there, there's about 10% of them that will actually do frontal sinus surgery because it takes a lot of training to make sure you don't cut into somebody's brain when you're, opening up that space. However, this product, because it was like a balloon on a flexi straw, the engineers who designed it would be horrified if I described it that way, but that's essentially what it was. You can't hurt anybody. And so it made it possible for, your perfectly good ear, nose, and throat surgeon to be able to do frontal sinus, infection treatment kind of for the first time, which really is 90% of the doctors who just wouldn't touch this. Now they can. Okay. So that's the backdrop. That's what we're talking about. And so you can see why that might be exciting for doctors to be able to say, hey, I could do these other sinuses, but not the frontals. Oops. Okay. We got that one. Okay. And so this is another perspective. This is looking at the maxillary sinus. Most people, will be tending more to the maxillary sinuses. They're kind of in your cheeks areas. And this is what the thing does. You get into the sinus and you basically, balloon it open and rinse it out. And it's great. And so the thing that happened with our company was that we went into this world of functional endoscopic sinus surgery. That's what kind of the surgical practice is called, with balloons. And we said, hey, let's call it balloon sinuplasty. Okay. Because we wanted to sound more gentle, because it really was a different thing. And we wanted it to be more palatable for patients. It sounds much better. The problem is in the nomenclature, in what you're calling it. Immediately, doctors have to ask, was I trained to do that? Okay. The insurers say, well, that's something different. We don't reimburse for that. Okay. And so in this naming, it was kind of this horrible hilarity of opening up a huge can of worms by coming up with claims or, some sort of naming convention that dramatically impacted the company in a whole lot of ways. In that for a while, there was potentially not going to be reimbursement for this treatment, and like as in none. And when the customer discovery got into this area, because functional endoscopic sinus surgery has extraordinary reimbursement. It's on the order of $35,000 per procedure. And so this, if we are calling this, instead of balloon sinuplasty, tools that are used in FES, then doctors can credibly claim the $35,000 and generate that in about an hour. Okay. As opposed to kind of like a 4-hour, 5-hour possibility. It doesn't always take that long, but when you think about, taking your time and looking for complications, especially if you're getting into frontals, and then there's the recovery time, there's potentially ICU time, $35,000 for in and out in about an hour procedure is amazing. So doctors loved this. And we also have to make sure that you're doing it safely. So we ended up dialing back from balloon sinuplasty to tools used in FEST to maintain the reimbursement. But what I'm bringing that up because I really want you to think about the impact of the terminology that's used. We're going to get into that some more. Okay. Of all these interventions, one of the things we also think about in sinus surgery is that what's really good for helping people with sinus issues, chronic sinus issues, is steroids. You know, they reduce inflammation. If you mix a little antibiotic with some steroid, you can kill infection, reduce inflammation, and whatever work you do in there lasts a whole lot longer and the patient feels better. So the engineers developed another balloon that was porous. And so you could fill it up. You could place it in the sinus and just fill it up with whatever medication you wanted to put in there. And steroids, when you inject them, insert them, whatever, they just kind of rinse out. So they really only act as long as they're, well, until they've rinsed out. But if you can make them dwell for a while, in some cases, you might not need surgery at all. You just put this thing in there with a steroid in it, and it's, you know, kind of the long-acting version of any sort of medication, right? So that was the thinking. But when you think about that, you have to look at the anatomy of this thing. And so that's what we have here. And if you just look at the balloon in the middle, this is essentially what it is. There's all these things to be able to see where it is and to place it. But what you really need to think about is that steroid is probably going to have a different viscosity than like saline or water. You know, different fluids that you might put in here are going to have different viscosities. And so engineers think, well, we have to tune the product to whatever's going to go in there. That makes sense, right? And that's where we open up the can of worms. Okay. Because what was known is that what doctors needed was as you see just below this row of images, not just a spacer is what we wanted to call it. You know, you open up the sinus and then you put this thing in to hold it open. You might call that a spacer. I guess you could, sort of. What they really wanted was this drug-eluting thing. And they didn't want a balloon holding open a space because then the balloon is blocking the space. They really wanted was a stent holding open the space and eluting drug. And in that last image I showed you, as we were looking at the ethmoid sinus, right? Wouldn't that be great? That's what we want, okay? In the long run, that's like the optimal or the ideal product. Now, on this slide, as you can see, I have a few different options for what the indications for this might be. Is it a spacer for general sinus anatomy? Would it be a spacer for the ethmoid sinus? Again, you might be asking yourself, why am I making space for what? What? Is it a stent? Is it a stent for general sinus anatomy? Is it a stent for the ethmoid sinus? Okay. Is it a drug-eluting spacer? Is it a drug-eluting stent? Each of these things will have profoundly different test criteria and regulatory approval timelines. Okay. Profoundly different. And so what I want you to be thinking about with your target product profile and the sequencing of, you know, your products that are as they're entering the market, you kind of need to be thinking about how you're going to walk through these options. Which one of these are you going to go to market with? Because ultimately, you want to go to market. Me as a medical device engineer, I did a lot of research engineering, like invented a lot of stuff. I wanted to get to the market. I wasn't really thinking about the market. I was really thinking about the clinic as quickly as I possibly could. You don't necessarily want to do a lot of procedures. You don't want a lot of patients, but you need 1, you need 5, you need 10, so that you can understand some of the things that you don't get otherwise. Like, you might not be thinking about this when you're working on the bench. Packaging. How are you going to package this thing so that it doesn't get crushed? It can, you know, withstand the heat of, you know, summertime in Texas. You know, it can go, you know, I don't know, Minnesota in the winter. Packaging is actually a huge deal. When you start to think about when it comes out of the package, can somebody actually use the thing? You think about the usability, right? These are things that you can design, but you don't actually know that they're good or they're really going to work until you start putting these things out into a clinical arena. And that's where you see people actually try to use the thing. So it's really critical to start early, kind of with anything that's safe, so that you can exercise the other aspects of your product development system. And quite often in medical device companies, there are far more people in manufacturing than there are in R&D. Okay? But if you just think about that, one person can design something, a couple of people can design something that can take 50 people to build. Okay? And so all the things coming out of those 50 people are the parts that get exercised once you start with anything. Okay? So we want to get out there. So, you know, but Clarence said, you know, we're going to call it a spacer, the microflow spacer. And that was great. Wasn't called a stent, definitely wasn't drug-eluting stent, right? So microflow spacer. Flow what? Oh, doctor, you can put any fluid in there you want, right? And of course, the engineers had tuned it so like if you put saline in there, it would just run right out because it was optimized for the viscosity of, you know, the steroid with antibiotic in it. Okay, so that kind of poses an interesting question. The salespeople are potentially, in some way or another, wink, wink, nudging the doctors to put what the doctors want to put into it without telling them to, because that's illegal. And so you, as product developers, really need to be thinking about where you are in this series of claims and what promises you're making and how you can stay, as in keep everybody in your company in line with that. And so sometimes, you know, I've really enjoyed first in human work because I have full control. We're only treating 10 patients or 30 patients. In a lot of cases, I was at every single procedure. And so I'm the only one talking to anybody, right? So I can control this and I can keep it safe in that way. That might be one of the things that you're thinking about as you're getting out to the clinic with a spacer for general sinus anatomy, perhaps. That wasn't my role at this company. It has been my role at other companies. So the reason we think about this is because it might be we have clearance to do something general, and the physician wants to do a physician-sponsored study, and that study would explore various solutions legitimately. There's a protocol with various solutions that might go into there, and you could see the impact that they'd have on the patient's, you know, healing journey. Okay? Things to think about as you're thinking about market entry and what you're claiming. Because of course, when you get into stent, there's a whole, you know, backdrop of what stents are and drug-eluting stents and that sort of thing. And you can look that up. If you ever want to know, hey, I'm thinking about making this thing and I want to know what goes into the testing of that. And Karen, please share these slides. So the links are all in here and you can just like get these and, you know, shop around online. What would it look like if we did one thing versus another thing? So you can get in here. It's the FDA. FDA is great. They actually really try to help people do stuff. And you can start searching around. It's not necessarily obvious, but you'll get the hang of it pretty quickly. And you can see what other products are out there. And then generally there's documentation associated with them. And with that, then you can start to get a sense of what testing was required, what actual claims they're making in their labeling, what indications they have. Because when you get clearance, 510(k) clearance, I'm just going to say for now, there is a very clear indication statement. And when I was in my marketing roles, it was very explicit. It was a quote. It was not, you don't get to like change the words around. There is a statement that you get in your clearance letter, and that is the statement verbatim that goes on your packaging. You don't get to switch the words around, right? So you'll get to see those and what other products are indicated for. Do you have any questions about that so far? All right, I'm gonna keep going. Okay. Okay, there's also all these great tips. You know, the FDA, as I said, wants to help. So you can get into again, the link on this page, and pull down these are talks, like video recorded talks and their presentations, with information for how to think about each of these different things, systems overall, getting into safety performance. And so you can start to think about, when you're developing a product, what is it that you're going to need to do to make sure that what you have is safe, okay? There's just another page, more helpful links. These should be live links. I hope they work for you. If they don't, I'm sorry. That's all I can give you. This is something I got from NIH, and they're very excited to put together really a consolidation of these information sources and tools to help folks like you develop things. Because as much as possible, we want the hard part to be the science which has been done, because the development part folks have been doing for years. I've been doing it for decades, right? Like, I don't always need to understand the science because I know kind of the development part of whatever I'm looking at. And so they're trying to replicate that for folks. Okay. Here's something else, as I was kind of alluding to earlier, is all these other things going on in the background. So from the business, the technology, and the supply pieces, there's a whole lot of activities that are coming into play. And that really does get it. I mean, if you think about it, you have to set up a customer service system. I remember the first time I created a customer service system from scratch. Like, you have to have instructions for what to say. You have to figure out shipping and receiving. So all these things also come into play, and you're getting an opportunity to exercise things that ensure the quality and integrity of the promise that you make with the claims that you're making. When you're claiming to someone, you can use it for this, you're claiming to them that they will receive it in good working order and be able to do that. So be thinking about this as well, okay? We're gonna get beyond that. Go to the next slide. Okay, this is a fun part. This is where we get to the, what does this stuff all mean, okay? The FDA, as you know, has different classes of medical products, and those different classes of products kind of have different levels of, well, definitely time to market, but also rigor and what you're going to have to do. So if you're thinking about something and it really is kind of like, a Band-Aid, what are you going to have to do to get a Band-Aid on the market? Not too much, actually. In a lot of cases, there's sort of a notification, but it's not really that you're going to have to do brand new, fresh testing, because if you're doing it in a way that you want it to get to market efficiently, you'll be using same materials that have been used before. Okay, and quite often when you do those searches on FDA webpage, they will be listing what's been used in other products. Some of the products will have a lot of information redacted, and they are claiming that they want to do that to keep their proprietary aspects of their technology proprietary. But if you keep searching, you'll find another one that has a listing of more of the materials. And so you'll find there's industry standard materials. Just use those. It's a whole lot easier. When you get into things like Band-Aids, the adhesives are actually the biggest deal. They have the potential to be safe or overwhelmingly aggressive on the skin and poisonous. And so again, industry standard adhesives and the gauze bed. So that's just an example of how, if you said my innovation is in the shape of the Band-Aid, then great, that's a great product. Go out with that, but use all the standard materials. And then that makes it really nice and easy for you to slide into the categories that have already been established, so that from the regulatory perspective, your product looks just like every other product. But from the commercial perspective, there is some innovation, right? That makes it appealing or helpful in use for a customer. And of course, the class 2 things, most of the devices I think that we talk about are class 2. And those are the things where you're going to be doing some testing, because you have to have designed the thing. You have to convince yourself that you can make it repeatably and with good quality. But then you're going to have to do definitely some clinical literature searching to show clinical documentation that what you have is safe and good. And then probably some animal testing to have at least tried this once, whether it's a drug, we focus mostly on toxicity initially, but devices are mostly focusing on, does it actually do what it's supposed to do? Devices use far fewer animals because it's more of a, can this actually be done, rather than looking for like a statistical significance from a preclinical test set on a device side. Whereas you might be looking at the significance, a statistical significance, I should say, on the drug side, when you're looking at toxicity and those sorts of things. Then also, you just think to yourself, what I'm claiming is going to put me in a certain class of product, and each class of product is going to have a different approval timeline. So if you're trying to get to the place of, how do we get this concept out to the world? And even if it's just in the hands of 1 or 2 doctors, which is my preferred way to do it, how do we get started with that? Start doing small studies so that we, hand in hand, working with a clinician, can prove that our recommended treatment is actually a good idea. Because what we find is that things that look like a great idea from kind of the technical perspective or the engineering perspective, sometimes even the clinical perspective, when you actually put them in a clinical setting, they turn out to be really bad ideas, like really bad. One thing that was kind of funny, I worked at one company, we were making catheters. There were these long catheters, and they had these super fancy catheter shafts for this drive mechanism. So we packaged them straight in a box. We didn't curl them like you normally do and put them in kind of like a pizza box. Package them straight, so there'd be no kind of preset bend to them. And so these boxes were like 5 feet long. What that meant was they could not be in the cath lab, because there is no space in the cath lab where you can put a 5-foot long box. So they would have to store them like down the hall in an equipment closet, with like an ultrasound machine or something, which, when you think about it, like, that's a horrible idea. Like, right, you have to leave the room, run down the hall, figure out, you lose track of inventory, right? So that's even something like that. It could be something like the tray that you're putting your device in. When you open it, it just kind of pops out like a jack-in-the-box, and all the pieces end up on the floor. That sort of stuff happens, right? And then you could even get to things like, hey, engineers always want to do this. And I could say this because I was an engineer, right? They always want to put a beeper or a buzzer or a bell indicating that their device is like ready, or it's done its thing, or give an alert. And I cannot tell you the number of times I dragged engineers into the operating room with me, and I said, okay, do you hear all these beeps? You are not adding another beep to this room, right? Like, your product is not that important. So you think about those things as well. Would it be confusing? Okay, so again, these are things that we need to explore early. So we're trying to pick some claims that make it so we can say, hey, we're just like a 1-month regulatory, it's probably going to be 3 months at least, clearance with some really simple claims so we can get started. Okay, and then you might expand your indications to say, okay, now we're really going to go for the gusto. We're going to claim stent, or we're going to claim drug-eluting stent. And then you're going to be doing more testing and that sort of thing. And class 3 things are the implants. And I've worked on some implants, and those are, I've never released an implant to market because, those are often, like, hips are fine. No one's going to die if your, hip replacement breaks. I was working on heart surgery stuff, and like, if the thing failed, like, the person would have died in less than a minute. So, there's a, can you make it work? Yes. All our testing passed. Yes. Was it worth the risk? We got other products we're working on, so no, right? And that happens too. And it happens for good reason. We're supposed to make things that help people. Are there questions about any of that so far?
Betty, can you share a little bit about maybe some of the benefits of being more unique to the market? Because I think a lot of innovators might weigh that out, like maybe I can follow this path and I can identify this predicate and match my intended uses and my product profile close enough. But what are the benefits to, having your own pathway in?
Oh, well, wow. When I used to invent stuff, I always wanted to be the most unique, innovative, way out there thing. And now being more on the business side of things, I think about, how can we just get started with something simple? I think even if you have a complex system, you can simplify it. You don't have to. You can simplify it. If you choose not to simplify it and really go out with kind of the full feature set, or really something that is this integration of maybe it's different components and sensors or what have you, that does put you in a different place, and you can build excitement around it because it's still essentially a research project that you have gotten FDA clearance to pursue in clinical practice. So you end up thinking about it that way. And that is very exciting. There can be a lot of publications that come out of things like that. I worked on basically it was a Kevlar balloon to open up aortic valves. And, we did 30 cases in Europe, and asked one of the lead doctors, hey, would you be willing to put together an abstract? And they did, because the fellows always need abstracts to write, and they always need opportunities to get on the podium. And we got an abstract with our device on the biggest catheter meeting in the world. And that was because we didn't try to make it too simple. We did something that was kind of mainline for a treatment area, and people were very excited about it. But we had clearance to start with simple claims, but we gave the doctors room to use it in the way that they would want to, so that it was sincerely a physician-sponsored study. We just gave them free product, and I would go to make sure if they had any questions, I could answer them. And that was incredibly powerful for us, was to have physicians doing that research and really peer-to-peer talking about, is this a good idea or a bad idea? And talking about their experiences in the clinic. You can also go for that, kind of long vision thinking indication off the bat. So a lot of new drugs are they're new. I work with some folks over at the Institute of Protein Design over here in Seattle, and everything they make is brand new. Like, they're totally synthetic proteins. And so you're going to be testing for a while. And it might be something that is going to, treat irritable bowel. Or I was telling one of them, I was like, hey, can you mix some of the celiac disease treatment stuff into flour, and just sell bags of flour that will prevent a celiac reaction? Wouldn't that be amazing? That's a big, long study. And as you all are doing research, it might be up your alley, right? If you're really interested in and excited about that aspect of the research, that might be a great way to partner in clinical practice, if you yourselves aren't in clinical practice or aren't running a clinic, to be able to say, hey, this is going to be a 3 to 5 year program. We're going out with the full features, and we're going to get grants to do this, and then we're going to publish the data. And with that data, then you would be saying, here's what we've got. Let's launch with this. We can build a company around it. Yes, Susanna.
Hi, Teddy. Thank you so much. I think I got a question a little bit out of your scope, but any information that you can help me with, it will be grateful. In your experience, how good is the FDA regulating software or applications? In our case, we're trying to develop a little app that people can track their improvement of health through the application. And I don't know, from my experience, this is not something that the FDA will regulate, but as it will, the end outcomes will be health related. I don't know if there's something that we might be able to do or have it in our scope in order to be able to patent our website or our application.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So off the bat, FDA does regulate apps depending on what you're claiming. So, and what the app does. So if it's a health tracker, they're not going to regulate like a step counter or, a pulse oximeter. A pulse oximeter that's included in like a fitness device. A pulse oximeter could be regulated, right? If it's an app to track, daily habits, probably not regulate. If it's an app to track daily habits and based on those habits, recommend something, they're going to regulate, right? So, especially, I work with a lot of folks on digital health stuff, and what the real line is, what does the app do with the information? If it ever recommends anything, you're going to the FDA. If it ever classifies kind of the health result, you're very likely going to FDA, because if you think about it, that classification is something that a medical professional should be doing. Like a doctor is going to look at your blood pressure. If it just reads blood pressure, okay, whatever, but if the device says, oh, your blood pressure is, quote, high, oh, you're definitely going to FDA. If it says, we read your blood pressure, you should go see your doctor, that's great, right? If it says, we've read your blood pressure and we want to compare it to all these other people's blood pressure, that's where it gets kind of interesting. And that's where I, as like a troublemaking creative engineer, become marketer. I tend to drive regulatory people nuts, because I'm like, I'm not claiming what's normal. I'm just showing a comparison with the whole rest of the country. Now, is that claiming something, right? Really important that you talk to a regulatory expert early on, just for like a half hour, right? This is a very simple, I do teach in the regulatory affairs master's program, but I teach risk and risk analysis because that's kind of my wheelhouse. But I have at ITHS, in our technology development center, we have 2 people on our team who are 30-year regulatory experts. And so they do these consultations all the time. And you can just reach out and talk to them, and they can get you pointed in the right direction. But I think you're hearing what I'm saying about it's okay to have sensors and have a digital meter, and it's okay to track patterns, but whenever you make any claims or you're making recommendations, that's when you get into the software as a medical device. SAMD, software as a medical device. You can look that up, and the FDA's kind of recently, in the past 3, 4, 5 years, been coming out with a lot more information to help people working in this field, because it's so powerful, right? I mean, you just think about, I was talking to my daughter earlier, and we were talking about, because she rose, and we were talking about, gosh, it is kind of known by trainers that in certain parts of the menstrual cycle, performance can be better than others. And I was like, oh, wouldn't it be amazing if you could map your menstrual calendar with your like your race calendar, and like, these are some of the areas of research. But are you recommending, like, if the app told her to race on this day, that seems benign, but the app is telling somebody to do something based on some health information. So even though it seems benign, I would say you're still talking to FDA, right? So this is where it gets a little soupy. But please do reach out, and happy to have you talk to people, because it's fun. I mean, ultimately, we want to be able to have the app make all these fantastic recommendations, but that might be your optimal product or your ideal. And if you think about the initial product, it's going to be, your user interface, what's going to make people use your thing is if the user interface is good. But if you can't even get it into people's hands to evaluate that user interface, you don't want to wait 2 or 3 years to find out your user interface doesn't work. You can find that out like today. So find that out today, and then you can have the user interface people developing that in parallel with the development of the sensors, the firmware to drive the sensors, and then all the algorithms, of course, because that's not, you don't just like get data and know the answer, right? You think about what algorithms help us understand what a step is versus, those original Fitbit contests. I've heard people would just like put their Fitbit in the dryer and run it, and somehow they have 20,000 steps. You know what I mean? Now I think Fitbits can tell the difference between somebody walking and being in the dryer. But that's complicated. So you need all those people working in parallel with you. So it's best to get started as early as you can. Other questions? All right, moving on. Here we go. So I just kind of laid this out. I totally made this up. Again, I technically teach in regulatory affairs. I am not a regulatory expert. So, and this time to market bit, this is startup time. I'm from Silicon Valley, I go fast. Lots of folks would take longer than this, but this is possible if you had a team already together and you had a thing. So if you have a thing and it works on the bench, and you've done some initial kind of bench testing such that you believe it's worth pursuing, that's that time point plus what I have in this chart. And again, I just kind of made it up. What we're really getting to, though, is this price point. So this microflow spacer, it's sold for $1,500, which is kind of a lot for a balloon on a stick. I mean, really? Like, it's a balloon on a stick. I mean, granted, it was high-tech, complicated. It was really amazing. Took a lot of skill to make it, but it's $1,500. You get $1,500 if it's drug eluting, which is to say, if you can put drug in it and over 2 weeks, it slowly releases that drug, or over a week, it slowly releases that drug. That is definitely a $1,500 clinical benefit for sure, right? Because even if an extreme surgery is done, that surgery is going to have a much more durable result if you have those antibiotics and those steroids in right after the surgery. Okay, it's worth $1,500. However, if you have a spacer, like a balloon that you're just going to shove in something that like maybe it shouldn't even be there, or you're going to claim that putting in the ethmoid sinus and injecting this thing with saline to like rinse the ethmoid sinus, technically, yeah, you're rinsing out the sinuses, but like, is that any better than a neti pot? Really? You know what I'm saying? I'm going to say you're only going to get $150 for a spacer. So this is where this all comes together. And so this is, honestly, this is why the company would say, hey, let's go for the quick thing, get it out there. And they just set the price to $1,500, and they only worked with people who would pay it, which kind of works because reimbursement is very different in different parts of the country. New York, New Jersey, California, their reimbursement for some procedures is twice that of, and I looked this up one year, it's like twice that of like Kansas, right? Literally, same procedure, twice the reimbursement. You're like, oh, okay. Crazy, but that's what happens. I see a question in the chat. Do mental health support apps, softwares need to perform a clinical study? Depends on what you're claiming. It's the same sort of thing. So if you have an app, which would be like a, just like a chat app, and I love these. I love apps and digital health things for mental health. Go anywhere, be anywhere, find your place of privacy, be on the road, whatever. It's fantastic application, just what you're claiming. And then the question is, what are you going to do in case of crisis? Or, recently in the news, there's been all this stuff about AIs responding to folks and saying things that the AI shouldn't, right? Like my brother happens to be a therapist. He's trained for a long time to know what not to say. He's trained for a long time to know when somebody's in a place that needs to be managed in a certain way. Can your app do that, right? If you're treading into those waters, you really need to have fail safes in place. And then I would say, yeah, have some clinical data, some validation, and then what does that look like, right? But if it's really tracking, this morning I felt like this, this afternoon I felt like this evening I felt like this, that might be the thing that you're mapping to maybe blood sugar. So maybe it's mental health, maybe it's blood sugar, maybe it's just step counting. Maybe if you're mapping that mood to step counting. My watch does that. I go for a run, it asks me, how do you feel? Like, do I need FDA clearance for that? No. But if you're going to be, getting into topics that are more risky, this is where we step back and we say, what are the risks associated with this product and this program? Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much.
Wonderful. Okay, let's move on because we have some excitement we're getting to. This slide I just included because this is a slide I use in my last entrepreneurship class. People always say, like, how do you know what market to go after or what to do? And I just sat down and I thought about it. I think these factors are kind of everything you need to know to assess a market. Over on the right, you see I have market 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And in each of these, there's kind of the considerations. When you're assessing markets, don't get bogged down in the like, I need to find a market research report for every single data point, whatever. Sometimes you can just say high, medium, low, right? And that, when you start to see the chart on portion on the right with the high, medium, and lows in it, one of your markets is really going to stand out for you. And when I say market, it might be, mental health support app. Am I talking to, am I talking to teenagers who didn't develop the social skills they needed during COVID? Or am I talking to firefighters? Am I talking to veterans returning home? Personally, I would love to see stuff for veterans. I can't even imagine pulling somebody off the battlefield and say, okay, you're home, you're fine. It's like, whoa, culture shock, right? And so you'll start to see these things shake out and you can think about it. So I encourage you to use this table to just kind of get a sense of high, medium, lows and like what looks appealing for you and the way you're going to run things so that then you can choose one and then optimize your claims for that. Okay. Okay. Go to the next slide. All right. Product spotlight. Very exciting. This is where we get to the juicy bits. Yeah. It's a note of caution in this talk. So Stratus was approved in 2006. I can't believe it was that long ago. Oh, yeah, I'm old. Anyway, then they could keep it in for 14 days. It would, put out, the drug. That was awesome. And they were marketing this thing, but it was, it was dishonestly promoted. Like some people weren't walking the line of, oh, you can use saline, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And then they were like, yeah, just put some, steroid in there. I'm not allowed to say it, but, whatever. So that is one of the things that happens when salespeople are pushed to hit a number and they're just out there and they're pressured to do this, right? Like you have to design systems such that even under pressure, people still keep the patient safe. This is really important, right? Really, really important. Okay. So, so then the company got acquired by Johnson & Johnson, which was super exciting. I am weirdly lucky. I started at the company a week before the date of record. So somehow I got these stock options and then like a week later, told my wife, I'm like, hey, I mean, granted, I didn't have that much because I was so late, but it's a very nice Christmas. I'm telling you. Uh, that was pretty cool. We were all very excited about the acquisition. Then there was some litigation. Oops. Why? Because there was a whistleblower. Some people think like whistleblower is a good thing. Some people think whistleblower is a bad thing. It was essentially false marketing, right? Like this whole thing that I'm talking to you about of start simple, do some early clinical work, get clinical validation and proof, then go back to FDA to get expanded claims to say the things that you've realized you can safely say through your clinical validation, then do it the right way. The Clarent did not do it the right way. Okay. They're selling these, balloons on a stick for $1,500 and just making all this money. So Miss Lukoski was a whistleblower, awarded $3.5 million for doing this. Miss Lukoski, Milena, is a fantastic person. She's a friend of mine. And, I first met her at a sales conference and then went to visit her territory and, got to see and meet her customers with her. And it was a struggle. She was in this place of, and I'm just going to say it, it was this very misogynistic sales team. She was definitely not treated well. And she was in this place of like, they're pushing me to do this stuff. Like they're treating me horribly. And you know what? This is wrong. So, and this is a quote from her. And I had her talk to, I was teaching this engineering ethics class and I had her talk by Zoom to the class and just about her experience going through this. And I myself got interviewed by the company HR team. Is they're like, well, there's a whistleblower thing, and they're asking, do you know this? And I was like, yeah, that's true. Which was, I don't know if that's what they wanted to hear, but that's what they got. And so it turns out, it's like some people got convicted. Yeah. Guy on the right is the CEO of the company. Guy on the left is VP of sales, right? All they had to do was do a little study. There were so many devices in use, They could have just collected the data. And before there were so many devices in use, they could have just collected the data and then gone back to FDA. When you collect that additional data and go back to the FDA, it is not a 3-year thing. It is like a 3-month thing. You have to put, well, if you're selling this many things at $1,500, relative to that, it's a little bit of money. But more importantly, it's the right way to keep people safe. So I just had to finish with this. Like, I don't know if you've seen the movie Do the Right Thing. This goes way back. But, I think, me personally, having been a medical device engineer for so long, I got into it because I think it is a wonderfully challenging and beautiful way to help people. And it's not hard to do the right thing. And we can, right? We're in a place where we are exposed to, the most futuristic, greatest science and technology development. I strongly believe that all the health technologies we need for the next 10 years are on people's benches and data in their computers today, right? And so we're in a place, doing things the right way where we can really help a lot of people. So I always just kind of have that as my message, and I hope you'll be in touch. We have a technology development center at ITHS. You can reach out anytime. If you just search ITHS Technology Development Center, you'll get to our page, that one that you kind of see pictured on the right. And then you can click down, you can connect with us and reach out anytime and all that sort of stuff. And we're around. Any more questions?
Right on time. Any questions from anyone on the call? All right. Well, thank you so much, Teddy. This is a great presentation, super helpful for everyone to be thinking about as they're going into these REACH applications. and other biomedical commercialization opportunities. So reach
Hmm.
out to us, reach out to Teddy. And I think
Happy
that's
to
all.
help.
Okay.
All
Yeah.
right. Enjoy. Good luck.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Bye. Here's my thing.